One of my favorite phrases, iron sharpens iron. We're not meant to go through this world alone. And in fact, we're so much happier and live longer when we don't. You'll meet people that have achieved all these levels of quote unquote success, but they're not happy. And the reason why is because they, for some reason or the other, decided to kind of go it alone when fulfillment doesn't just come from the money part. It doesn't just come from the status part. It comes from when you look back at who's around you and who you're doing things with. If anybody's listening and they wouldn't consider themselves an athlete, it's not about the sport. It's not about the specific movement itself. It's kind of the performance of you in your life and who you're doing it around. And there's so many people that are actually on your team.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. Are you craving a social life without the hangover? I'd encourage you to join Zero Proof. It's a lighthearted community diving into all things connection, lifestyle, and fun without the drinks. From wellness tips and product highlights to real life stories and every way to have a blast beyond the bar. Zero Proof has you covered. Be a part of the Zero Proof movement and take your social game up a notch. It's honestly one of my favorite newsletters. I'm going to put the link in the show notes for you all. Check it out. And if you enjoy it, tell them that Mile 40 sent you over. Again, check out Zero Proof. Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. Thank you for all the feedback. It has been an incredible ride, and I am so grateful for you all, the listeners. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from, check out the show notes, pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious, use that discount code, and I will personally sign and mail the books myself. Also, take a moment, click 5 stars on whichever platform you're listening on. It really helps the show grow, and I greatly appreciate it. Today's guest is a special guest, and I am super excited for today's episode. I have Dilan Gomih. She's a global speaker, human performance expert, and the founder of Dilagence, a company that empowers workforces to leverage well-being as a performance strategy. Her perspective and approach have been featured in Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Oprah Daily, The New York Times, Business Insider, Pop Sugar, Shape Magazine, Pure Wow, and Pix 11 News. In addition to her work with Dilagence, Dilan is a guest lecturer at Harvard Business School and serves as a strategic advisor to the Initiative on Workplace Inclusion at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. Dilan earned her MBA from Harvard Business School and holds a BA from Yale. She is also a National Academy of Sports Medicine certified personal trainer, specializing in behavior change and women's fitness. Dilan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I am super excited to have you here. I really enjoyed catching up with you before we got to recording, just getting to know each other when we last chatted. And I know that the audience is going to have so much to pick up from you. So let's kick things off by just giving them some background into a little bit about, who you are before all these fantastic accomplishments. Give us some background into where life began for you.
We're going to throw it way, way back to the good old 90s.
Right.
Well, I think the critical part that I always consider is when you say Dilan, you're actually saying all 5 of my long Nigerian names at once. And I'm a first generation Nigerian American and the last of 4. And I would say when people ask, where do you kind of get your drive? Where do you get kind of your sprint mode from? I got to give it up to my parents. They've always been these really awesome models of highlighting how you can have the audacity to come to a whole new country and build yourself and support your family and keep believing that if there's something that you want to do and you want to achieve in this world, go get it. So I think I grew up with some pretty solid role models of continuing to go get it. And to that point, I will highlight my mom, who I don't think she'd mind if I say this. If I do, sorry, mama. She's one of these humans who, when I was 9, she wanted to become a lawyer. She wanted to become an advocate for people that couldn't advocate for themselves. So she went back to law school in her late 40s. And then after she graduated, did exactly that. She started advocating for people that couldn't advocate for themselves. And she's almost 70 now and still thinking about the next 10 to 20 years of her next chapter. So yeah, that's the energy with which I try to operate in this world.
That's awesome. When did you move out here?
To New York.
No, just to the States in general.
I was born here, but my parents
Okay.
came to the States almost 50 years ago.
Got it. Okay, cool.
But it's a beautiful thing realizing that, when I get to go back and forth between the US and Nigeria, seeing where my parents came from and then what they've been able to accomplish stateside. Is it cool to say, like, yeah, I'm really proud of my parents? Like,
it's very
like,
cool.
it's like, yeah, like, I think they're pretty cool. Like,
It's very cool. I mean, I love reflecting on immigrant stories. I mean, whether it's my own or whether it's the stories that we've had on the show. I mean, I just think it's so incredible to see the journeys unfold and to see how so many people's parents or grandparents came here with almost nothing. And, you know, now I think their biggest pride and joy is you, your siblings, and anything that you guys have accomplished. I mean, like, look, what more
what are you
could they
trying
have?
to do to my heart? You're trying to make it explode out of my chest?
I mean, look, what more could they have wanted? What more could have any of our parents wanted? When they came here,
Yeah.
that's the crazy thing, and the even crazier thing that sometimes I think about is like, could you imagine like immigrating anywhere else now and like,
Yo,
right?
you know,
And they
like,
all did it.
they did it. And, every so often, like, I just like will put myself in my parents' shoes where like
Yeah.
they came here, they like the rest of my family's all in Nigeria. They came here without their family, like just had like the audacity to say, like, we're going to build a life here. And it's just like wrapping my brain around that level of courage, like decision making, and then constant resilience. And what I love to remind myself, but then other people as well, like, we say the word resilience all the time, but do we understand what it really means? Like, it's built out of pain. It's actually built out of kind of like having to do the challenge. I mean, even super tactically, if you think about building a muscle at the gym, right?
Mhm.
Like, you
Yeah.
don't get stronger from like, if you're using a 10-pound weight to do a bicep curl over and over again, like, you have to put it through a little stress. And when I think about the stress of like, yep, gonna leave my entire support network behind, come to an entirely new place with like people that don't even necessarily look like me, like, that is
Yeah.
resilience on,
Learn a new language
you know?
and learn new customs and new cultural norms. It's so much to kind of like, and the thing is they did it probably
Mhm.
at a younger age than we'd ever consider doing it. Like,
Totally.
you know,
Totally.
and that's the other element too. Like, and this is not the same, but my wife and I joke around like I'm in my upper 30s. My wife is in a similar age range. I'm not going to age her, but we had
That's a
our
good hubby.
yeah, but like we just had our kids in the last couple of years, and she says like I can't imagine if I did this when I was like 20 in my younger 20s, like
Right?
right, and but like you think about it, and then you think about some of the things like our parents did and it's like, not only do they have kids, sometimes some of them had kids, some of them didn't have kids, but like they left everything, and had to figure it out. What with or without kids, it doesn't even matter. It just kind of makes it that much more amplified and crazy and
Right?
wild. But
Congrats on your first, by the way.
thank you, thank you. Well, we just had number two, so now we have two.
Congrats on number 2, by the way.
Yeah. So, but no, I say that because I think it is a really good way to set the stage for you. And you already alluded to this with regards to the role that your mother had in kind of helping you harness um, a level of resilience and more so, I think the idea of setting big goals for yourself. That's one of the things that I caught on in the last time that we spoke and today. I think that was ingrained in you earlier that you can accomplish anything that you put your mind to. And so I want to dig into that a little bit more. Talk to me a little bit about, aside from your parents raising you, were there any other points in your childhood that really stand out? Anything we need to know about, let's say, ages
Mm,
1 to 18?
yeah, and I think it's one of these things where, like, over time, you realize you tell your story, and then certain points really, like, marinate and stick with you, and you're like, "How did I not realize this along the way?" So, um, one of the things I think it's super important to share is, like, I did grow up playing a sport, but it's super counterintuitive to, like, what anyone would expect a Nigerian to do. I was a figure skater. So for those of you that are like, "Ah, Nigeria, it's the hot country," like, yep, I kinda just did the opposite thing. Went straight for the ice. And to that point of certainly our parents, but then there are these people around you that kind of have visions for what you can do before you see it yourself. The reason why I became a figure skater was I guess we went to some birthday party or something when I was, tiny, and I didn't fall. And my parents were like, "Okay, that's what you're gonna do. That's your thing." Um, so I grew up pretty accustomed to this concept of like, yep, gotta get to the rink before school and got to go back after, and like this ingrained element of like get up before the sun to get something done, and like the work is done when the work is done. um so the reason why I offer that is kind of like when I consider my first job out of college. that, like, it probably took me, even being out of Wall Street, so, like, that's my first job was, like, working on a trading floor on a foreign exchange desk. It probably took me leaving that role to actually connect the dots to, like, I don't know if I'm a morning person or if I became one, but I do know from a super early age, I was accustomed to being up before the sun. Um, I think the more interesting aha is the fact that the concept of fitness and how fitness made me a stronger human mentally and how it translated to like my performance in the workplace. I didn't connect that to my sport at all until I was like working on Wall Street. Like that was actually the first time that I realized fitness served me and made me a happier human versus like, the formative years. What do you go condition for? What do you go workout for? What do you go strength train for? In service of skating faster, jumping higher, being able to like hit your edges better. Like that's what fitness was for. It was for a sport, it was for competition, it was for something other than like actually me. And the realization of like when that happened is, the nature of any fast-paced environment, but particularly on Wall Street, where like those days where you're sprinting through, 10 to 12-hour days and making sure that you are on it
And
and
everything is moving at a million miles an hour.
everything's moving. And like also like if for whatever reason you're not, if you're watching this or listening to this on Spotify or
Yeah,
Apple,
yeah,
I'm a Black woman in this world. Hello. So
yeah.
like also when you're in an environment where it's like, also,
So
also
again, you don't look the same. So you don't look the same anywhere. I mean, I can only imagine on the rink you didn't look the same either.
fair point. Yeah. We should actually do like photos in the show notes or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No.
Um, So it's an arena where like low key, actually the fast pace was cool. And I didn't mind that grind. And I actually very much so still credit that those first experiences out of school for like understanding kind of the intensity that you apply to honing a skill and understanding the dynamics of play at the workplace. Um, But to the point of, like, really the formative part of, like, starting that job, I didn't feel like I could leave early. I didn't feel like it was okay to, like, step away. So imagine my absolutely being mortified when somebody was like, "Hey, we're gonna go to a spin class at, like, 5 p.m." And I'm sitting there, like, going into fight or flight thinking, "You want me to go with you to a spin studio in a dark room where the bikes don't move, pedal with you for 45 minutes
Huh.
and leave work?"
Huh.
And she had rank on me, so I went. But the entire time thinking about all the stuff that was at my desk and I had to do,
Everything that you were leaving behind. Yeah.
and like my, I have to clip into these shoes. When I got there, I felt like the most awkward human on the planet trying to force my foot into these things. So no one was more surprised than me than when I walked out of this flywheel sports class. a total woo girl, also waving a towel around in the air and actually feeling so much better. And I have to say, the feeling better part probably wasn't the outcome, right? The feeling better part was actually when I went back to work and I felt like I was, you know, zipping through things that I had to do, felt so much more confident. And when I left the work or like left work that day, feeling like I got stuff done, I feel really good. How that, no pun intended, kicked off the flywheel was realizing I want to feel like that every single day. And if the cause was that was I had to go to a spin class, or at the time, this is when ClassPass was offering $99
Huh.
unlimited. So
Huh.
I'm so sorry if anybody from ClassPass is listening. I probably helped break that business model. I definitely use the unlimited like all the time. But this pure concept of like, okay, I know that if I want my work to feel like I'm in a flow state, like if I'm at peak performance in the workplace, what I actually have to do is figure out how to configure my life and configure my days such that that well-being piece comes first. How do I make it so I can fit in the berries class or fit in the flywheel class? Even if I have to leave early, which is like an interesting thing to consider, which is like, oh, wait, I can't stay for the full 50 minutes, but you know what? I'll take what I can. And even when I do that, I go into the trading floor feeling like my best self. So that, question of like, I had to kind of share the figure skating piece right out the gate because I literally didn't realize that something I had been doing, like, earlier on before college and before working, um, served me in so many other ways. But I'd finally figured out how to tap it into like the rest of my life beyond just like a sport.
It's funny. I have a similar experience as well, and I love the way that you put it because I didn't. I like the way that you actually verbalized it was great because until you said it, I didn't think it. But I was in banking. I was working on a desk as well in the investment bank, a fixed income derivatives desk, and that's when I started spinning too. Except instead, it wasn't flywheel; it was swerve. So
Swerve!
yeah.
Yeah!
So
Oh my God,
yeah.
swerve! Were
So
we swerving at the same time? I was also
probably
taking those
Eric
classes too.
Posner's been on this podcast. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So and Eric actually got a whole chapter in my second book. Telling his story. And I don't know. Do you know him personally?
I've
Or
met Eric,
yeah.
and I'm
I know you
assuming
guys
this
got
was
the
like,
Harvard connection, so I figured maybe you might know him. But yeah, like Eric and I grew up together. And so he opened up Swerve and, he sent out a note to his broader community when he opened it up. I think it was 2015 at the time. So I was in the pits of things at the bank. And, similar to you, I was just kind of going through the motions. And then I started going to these classes and similar idea, right? I was trying to catch those 5:30 classes. And eventually I got to a point where I was like, making them the priority. I was like, it's not about because they were feeding my soul at the time. They
yes.
were giving me what I needed in order to perform, whether it was at work or in any other part of my life. And it was in those years where I started to realize like this isn't about like an immediate result. This isn't about the physical fitness as much as that does get impacted. It's really what it's doing for me as a person. Like what it's teaching me about myself, how it's helping me prioritize what's actually important to me. Um, and it was in those years where I started to develop ways to compartmentalize and to understand where priorities lie and how to make time for the things that I really care about in life.
And what's like so interesting as I think about those formative years, and I am like now like squarely picturing you also in like those 5:30 a.m. like
Well, you were
uh,
saying dark room, and I'm like, yeah, I think I know which dark room she's
you
talking
you
about.
know you know which
Yeah.
rooms we were in. Also they used to make great smoothies.
Mm.
But
Really good smoothies, yeah.
like just consider who goes to those classes in
Yeah.
particular, especially in like New York City.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was us. It was
Oh, yeah.
us. Like we needed it.
Yeah.
But it's
Absolutely.
also funny like how much we and very fairly so, right? We kind of forget to connect these dots between like there's a reason we need to like be in that class and like what happens after. But like so many people make this trade-off between work and feeling good while they do it. And like for me, I feel extremely fortunate that there are these moments that kind of like
It
created
clicks.
the clicked and
It
we didn't
clicks.
fight it. But I also deeply understand for so many other people, it's not that they want to fight it. It's just kind of like the know-how piece. Like, where does this fit? And is this actually okay? And is it okay to like, is 10 minutes worth it? Is it okay to take a 5-minute walk before a board meeting? And it's like, well, what's happened every time that you did? You felt better and you went in feeling really, really on. So let's kind of keep connecting this concept of the outcome to the priority, because it's actually not selfish at all to say like, if I want to be at the top of my mental game, my physical game is part of it too, and doing those two things. And
You
to the
brought up a
point,
good point that I want to make sure we don't look over: the people that were there,
yeah,
right? Like that's a thing that I think can kind of be forgotten if you didn't put yourself in that experience. Like you think you're at work with a bunch of high performers, and you might be in a certain capacity. But then you put yourself in arenas like those spin classes or, similar types of arenas, and then you realize that you're with high performers who are happy. Like, and, and there's a whole different element to it because you crave more of that. Once you see it in action, you want, and then you start to like attach yourself to these people just so you can pick up on just the small things that they do, how they go about their life to sustain that energy that probably comes from the physical activity. And
were
I
you
think that
part of the program?
what's that?
Did you do the program
I did
too?
the program, yeah.
Yeah, like when you're
Yeah.
saying that, I was just like,
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, but, like, I was there when it got started, and I'm still friends with a bunch of people, that were really heavily involved with it. But it was right around that time where, like, I was a lost soul in the city because I was so focused on my career that I didn't know this world existed. And there's probably a lot of people listening to this podcast being like, "What are these 2 people talking about?" But we'll get back on point. But when I started to kind of realize, like, it doesn't have to be this way. Like, you can make yourself better incrementally by challenging yourself to do hard things, which is what you're doing in those rooms, and by simultaneously surrounding yourself by people who have big goals, who are willing to challenge themselves, who can help you pave a path. And I always say on this podcast that, when it comes to athletes in particular, proven athletes are not there to put you down. Proven athletes are generally there because they've been able to embrace the idea of lifting up those around them, especially people who've played team sports or people who have succeeded, on a team level. Those are people who know, like, they didn't make themselves. Like, they were shaped by coaches, teammates, so on and so forth, and they generally pass that on. And that was one of the cool things that I really wanted to make sure that we emphasize is putting yourself in those arenas is eye opening sometimes. You start to see like the people who accomplish those really magnificent feats athletically, they want to help.
Yeah. One of my favorite phrases is iron sharpens iron.
That's right.
And it's this element of like, we're not meant to go through this world alone. And in fact, we're so much happier and live longer when we don't, right? So a critical part of that, and then like you'll meet people that have achieved all these levels of quote unquote success, but they're not happy. And the reason why is because they've, for some reason or the other, like decided to kind of go it alone, when like fulfillment doesn't just come from the money part. It doesn't just come from the status part. It comes from like when you look back, like who's around you and who are you doing things with. And that's what I think, if anybody's listening and they wouldn't consider themselves an athlete, like it's not about like the sport, it's not about the specific movement itself. It's kind of like the performance of you in your life and who you're doing it around. And there's so many people that are actually on your team, cheering you on. But sometimes when you're going through the rat race so much, you're either maybe nervous to pick your head up and see just, who's around, maybe worried that once you do that they don't care, when actually there's actually more research that highlights that more people care about you than you think. And more people want to be helpful than you think. And I think the beautiful thing is more often than not when you're in these environments like you described, not just for, but even in conversations like these, you just keep meeting people that want to help
Yeah.
and be
Yeah,
helpful.
you never once you ingrain yourself in it, like you're not you want to continue feeding yourself. You want more and more and more of it because what you realize is even the most accomplished people in that world, they're never settling, right? There's always just like a little bit more that they can do, and they can, and I think that level of humility of like there's no perfection in this. Like we're all going at it together, and the one thing that unifies us all is that like regardless of who we are, like there's always a little bit of improvement that we can add on to our overall game.
And it's
Um,
welcomed.
yes,
Like, you
and it's
see like
encouraged. Yeah,
encourage, like I'm going to give like like a traditional athlete example, then I'm also going to give like, a corporate example, right? Like LeBron, you're never going to see sit on his laurels and like stop training and like
yeah.
never go to the gym again, right? Like he's always trying to sharpen his game, like always trying to get better. And, right before this, I was on a call with like one of my mentors who, again, to this point where it's like as you're going, like there's still this element of, you know, surrounding yourself with people that are trying to like sharpen you, make you better. And she's someone who, like, by all standards and metrics of success, like she has been successful. And she's like, you know what? I want to go learn more new things. I think I need to learn more ways to be helpful to people. Like that's the mindset that she approaches life with in her 60s, where it's like, I'm not done. If I have air in my lungs, what else can I be doing to not only better myself, but in the process of that, better other people? Um, and I think the
It's
part
that
that,
growth mindset. It's
yeah,
that growth mindset. I mean, that kind of environment cultivates it.
yeah,
Um, and it clearly, that's like I think when you think about people who put themselves in competitive situations to begin with, like for instance, working your way up to get into Wall Street at that point in your career, like anyone knows if they're going into Wall Street, they're walking into a competitive landscape. Like no, most people aren't signing up for jobs on Wall Street expecting it not to be competitive. Um, but there's a difference between people who get there and then kind of coast, and then people who get there and continue to seek out ways to improve in the various departments. And I think that for better or worse, the people who are seeking that constant improvement tend to see like the world outside of Wall Street eventually come their way.
yeah. I mean, so I guess an important part to mention, and to the point of like how I realized I was being helped by this like community that I was building, but then also thought I want to be helpful. Um, it it I started teaching flywheel classes while I
Oh
was still
wow,
working on Wall Street.
let's
So,
go. Okay.
like while I was working full time, I was
Yeah.
teaching something like 7 to 10 classes.
What
Um,
what times were you teaching?
so like the same classes that I would go
Okay.
to.
So you'd be
I
doing
was
you'd be teaching at 5 a.m. and on the desk at 7.
I would teach those, but to that point where it's just like I didn't want to keep this element of discovering that movement
Yeah.
literally was making my mind better.
Yep.
Yes, we can say there's the research behind it. We understand this, but no one can scream it to the rooftops louder than me when I think about how I wasn't just working better. I was literally a happier person. Like people around me noticed the difference. And I think I was led by the question of, how do I make it so other people around me can work this way? Like, I feel like I'm squeezing 28 hours into 24. Like, how do I give this?
Yeah.
And the first answer I thought was like, I want to teach this. Then like the people that are in these classes, the people that are also like me, or whoever I can incrementally bring into class and be like, all right, come with me. I will guest you. Like, let's do this together. That was phase one. And if anybody's thinking, how on earth do you fit this into your schedule? I will just offer the super simple reframe of think of whatever your favorite thing is to do in this world. And when did anything stop you from doing it?
Yeah.
Answer is probably no. For me, I was infinity on high. Like there is nothing better than like energizing a room full of like my crew going to the workplace. I had that energy. They had that energy. You would see people that you were just in class with. And it really is iron sharpening iron. You are creating this magnifying effect because we also know that you give energy, right? Like if you're going in a better mood, the people around you are going to feel that. Like it does more than self-service.
Oh yeah.
To manage yourself, right?
Oh yeah.
And I loved that. But then the next question was like, I'm in a given class doing like 1 to 40 or 1 to 50. How do we change the ecosystem such that like these fast-paced environments, these large workforces, these people that are tasked with leading and managing so many other people can harness this for themselves no matter how short of time that they've got? And when I think about productivity, when I think about that flow state that I was just describing or peak performance, I didn't just mean the day to day or the week to week on the trading floor. Let's also think about the people that more often than not are able to live into their 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's because of these little things that they did along the way. And I knew far too many people in that world that were successful by all the traditional metrics again, had the title, had the money, had the status, and then they also had cardiovascular disease. And the person that I know that had a heart attack way, way, way too young. And I don't know what their genetic history was, but I do know that that was somebody that did not feel like they had the time to take care of themselves or go to the doctor or go do a workout or manage a potentially unhealthy lifestyle.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. I get asked a lot about my training programs and how I set myself up for success to cross finish lines all over the world. Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Recovery is half the battle. And in order to get that recovery, I rely on clean sources of protein. That's why my go-to protein shake is Owen. Only what you need. I have one after every single workout. 100% vegan and plant-based, Owen's plant-based shakes use a multi-source protein blend of pea, pumpkin seed, and flax seeds to include all essential amino acids to promote optimal daily health. Uncompromised taste. Owen brings together the essential elements of advanced nutrition, amazingly clean ingredients, functional superiority, and uncompromised taste. Now go ahead, go to www.liveowen.com. That's spelled LIVEOWYN.com. Use code MILE40 for 20% off your next purchase. Only what you need. What about the mental health issues? Like, I mean, I think as much as you bring those up, I also think about the mental health issues. I mean, there's so many things to consider here, but I think that, well, I do want to ask you, when you started instructing, were you open about it?
Oh my God, I was so nervous at first. Oh my gosh,
Well,
I was
important.
so nervous at first. I was so nervous.
Yeah. Did you hide it for a little, or did you like let it? I mean, did you tell them sooner rather than later?
So I remember I like told HR that this is what I was doing. I felt like I was having like this, Nigerian Clark Kent moment. And these are blue light glasses. I don't actually wear glasses, but I do believe in blue light. But this Clark Kent moment where it's like, okay, Wall Street by day.
I love it.
Flywheel instructor by really, really early and by night.
I love it.
But I will say a pretty critical moment that helped me feel like, and I started, telling the people on my desk they knew and stuff like that. But like the critical moment where I really felt okay was I was teaching this class on the Upper East Side, and my firm's, and I worked at a large investment bank, my firm's COO came in
Huh.
to this class.
Huh.
And I worked on the same floor
That's so
that his
funny.
office was in. And he recognized me. And he's like, aren't you on the fourth floor? I was like, "Mhm. Are you still working for us? Mm, mm, mhm. Cool. 45 minutes later, teach the class, like, playlist was lit, did my best. He was like, that was a great class. I'll see you on Monday.
That's amazing.
Thanks.
That's
So after
amazing.
that, I was like, I think I'm I. I think I'm I. I'm not saying like it certainly was like a risk. It certainly was like something where like I would not, uh, I also would not have done if I had concerns about like being able to like manage
Yeah.
the two effectively. And I like the nice thing is like it's not necessarily a forgiving world, right? Or like if you're really not balancing the two, you'll know because you're not
You'll
going to
know
be
right
there.
away. Yeah.
You'll
No,
know.
I think that's so important because there's a lot of people who like I struggled myself, right? Like I remember I told the story about um when the very first time I shared my story and it got some publicity and then I was invited to ring the closing bell at NASDAQ. But I didn't want to tell them at work because I was worried that, as you know, in the world of banking, everything is centered around compliance. And I didn't want
Mm-hmm.
anyone to tell me that I couldn't do it. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to sneak out of work and I'm going to do it. And I did. I snuck out at like 2 or 3 p.m. that day, rang the bell, came back. But as you know, also like in any financial institution, CNBC is on every TV. And and so the next day they were like, "Were you gonna say anything?" And I was like, you know, I didn't want to, but it's really important we have this conversation because
Yeah.
it was experiences like that, and it was experiences like me opening up once I started more religiously, taking those classes and finding that community that then allowed me at some point to be like, "You know what? I'm not gonna be shy about my, like, therapy appointments. I'm not gonna be
Yeah.
shy about my doctor's appointments because these things are important." And, sometimes we forget, like, like, eh, no one's gonna do it for you if you don't do it for yourself. No
No.
one at work is gonna be like, "Hey, did you get your workout in today?" Like, literally no one's gonna ask you that.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is like let's acknowledge the realities, right? Like here's what people are typically concerned about. There is the psychological safety issue. There's like the perception issue where it's like, we can want to shift away from a FaceTime culture all we want, but we know that one exists, right? So when it comes down to like, wait, how do I manage the idea of taking care of myself? There is like the valid fear and concern, but like I think a thing that I'm always a big champion of is you're inspiring more people around you than you realize, and more often than not, when you do figure out your way to do it and it's not disruptive, and obviously you can point to the fact that your performance isn't suffering, it's okay, right? Like you do have um, one life in this world, and the doctor's appointment to make sure that like you're okay. If there was like a something you should have paid attention to, it's going to be worth it to have gone. And I'm a really big fan of like no regrets. I think that is actually also something that like has moved me fairly well in this life. And for most people, I want it to be just as much of like positive energy of like manage your mind and manage your life, but also not the, oh man, I wish I had blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish that I had taken 10 minutes a day to take a walk. Or I wish that I had known that, like, I don't necessarily have to leave my desk, but every so often just like standing up in between not only would have been good for my mind, but it also could have been good for my lower back. Like, I don't want people to have like the very simple what ifs. And then, like, while I have the space, whether it fits in or not, but I'm also going to highlight for like leaders, you can tell people that it's okay all you want. But if we actually want to get rid of the psychological safety, if we actually want to get rid of the fear and the perception, you doing it in little ways,
Show
not
them.
even having to like be like, oh, I'm doing this, but you doing it, people are watching you. It's kind
Show
of
them.
like kids and their parents,
It's
they're
like kids.
watching.
It's exactly it. We talk about this all the time. Kids don't do as you say, they do as you do.
And I was at an executive offsite, and it was a team of fairly senior leaders, and somebody literally saying that they didn't feel comfortable going to the gym at the end of the day until they realized that their boss went to the gym. Like until they saw that, realized, oh, their boss was going, and not even at the end of the day, their boss had blocked out like 10 a.m. to go for 30 minutes, that they're like, oh, it's okay if I do it too. And this wasn't a junior analyst, not even somebody that's mid-level. It is somebody that was an executive. I mean, like, that was when I knew it was okay for me to do that too. But a lot of this does come back to this element of like how we manage our minds, and then what is it ultimately in service of, and how much time that we unfortunately have to spend figuring out if it's okay for us to do what we're entitled to do, which is live well and live for as long as we can. And maybe it's not the 60-minute workout, but should people feel entitled to get up and do like a lap around their floor? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Should people feel entitled to like get up and take a 5-minute walk to go get their own coffee as opposed to sitting there thinking about it? Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And know
Yeah.
that it's more than the coffee, and that it's actually like doing something to like in small increments help them to like live better and longer and happier. Yeah.
100%. 100%. I mean, it's interesting. When we first met, in the back of my mind, I knew this was not going to be a traditional episode, and it's far from a traditional episode, but I love it.
Sorry.
No, but I love it. I love it
You can
because
take us back to the traditional thing.
I honestly don't even know. I don't even know how to reroute us at this point. I don't even want, and I don't want to. I don't want to, because I do feel like for listeners out there, like this needs to be heard. This message needs to be get out there, that like it's okay. Like it's a struggle that so many of us had and have, and even after you like come to terms with it, you still wonder, like, am I the weird one? Like, or like, like, or am I limiting my career by like really, really doubling down on this? But the truth, or the truth that I've experienced is that um, the more and more I've taken care of these things holistically, right? Whether it was my physical wellness, my mental wellness, my emotional wellness, more doors opened up naturally. And I think it's scary because you don't necessarily know. You're not guaranteed anything. You don't know that's going to happen. And sometimes it sounds cliche, but I mean, from personal experience, that's what I've seen happen. And um, there's no better feeling than being able to show up daily as you are.
Mm.
And I think in a lot of corporate arenas in particular, it's a struggle to do that. But I encourage anyone listening to fight on, because it's like a whole new world once you show up as yourself.
It's interesting when you said that question. Like some people might be wondering, like, "Oh no, am I the weird one?" I hope you are.
Yeah.
I hope you are. I hope you are. And like those times that you did take those 5 or 10 minutes to like manage yourself, or like, step outside and call your kid, or like step outside and like do something that makes you feel better. I would actually ask that you kind of think about that time, and did you regret it? And did something better happen after? And more often than not, the answer is yes. Like we held a focus group a couple of months ago, and there was somebody that spoke super powerfully about how they initially felt really, really nervous to like start building in these walks that they did on a regular basis, like 10 to 15 minutes. And they raised it later on, and they're like, I'm so surprised, like, that, this hasn't like come back to bite me in any way. And people are like, they had no idea she was doing that. They didn't even like notice. And in fact, they're like, oh, that's actually a good idea. Right. So it's like extreme. If you're not watching me, I'm fervently
No,
like
I
nodding, and
can
I
see it.
understand deeply the person that is nervous or scared or thinking like that. Feels like easier said than done. And I think the increments of time that you've heard me say deliberately so have not been like the full workout class, or have not been like the, go out and do the marathon, unless, that is what you want to do. And if so, go ahead, but it's been saying that there's so much validity in any increment of time that you take for yourself to feel better, for your mind or for your movement. Like any amount of time that you do that, it's going to apply to what you have to do next. Because we live in a complicated world that's only become more increasingly complicated from like our world, my parents' world. Like it's
Yeah.
growing in complexity. So the more that you can create these strategies for yourself to manage what may or may not come your way
Yeah.
better, the better it's going to be.
Yeah. And I
Oh,
think to your point, like when you look at the statistics, nationwide in particular, right? I don't think you want to focus like if you live on the coast, if you live in New York or LA or Miami, it might be a little bit skewed. But if you look at it nationwide, you do want to be the outlier when it comes to, how you take care of your physical health or your mental health, right? Like you do want to be the person that is selfish when it comes to working out. You do want to be the person that, puts your family over your job because you'll realize that like none of the people who go the other direction, uh, the stories generally don't end well.
mm-hmm,
Um, but that
mm-hmm.
the problem is it's just the overarching narrative. And so one thing that I think that you really articulated well is don't be afraid to be the outlier because the outlier uh, generally is the one with the happier ending. And so that's an important takeaway. Um, so I'm gonna try to bring us back here. Let I
We're going back to the traditional path. We're going back to Yellow Brick Road. Yes,
I'm gonna
love it.
try. I'm gonna
Let's go.
try. I'm gonna go straight to it because I think what I really want the audience to kind of pick up on, as it's a central theme to the show is when you look back on your lifetime. Are there any specific moments or series of moments that defined a period of adversity for you, which helped instill a little bit of you already got that crack of resilience in terms of your upbringing, but that maybe impacted you personally or kind of helped you redirect yourself on your own personal journey?
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to one of them earlier when I was talking about cardiovascular disease,
Yep.
but um, yeah, where there's light, there is dark. There is so let's kind of set the stage where I was kind of already exploring this, living this dual life where I was working full time. I was also teaching classes, and I was already starting to ask my question from like kind of like the positive standpoint, like the growth mindset point of what does it mean to be in the business of fitness and wellness? Like, what does that mean to actually want to build something that makes it so like I'm not the outlier and we have systems that exist that support every human and allow them to thrive and work well for as long as they can. So that was like already like kind of like the growing question. But when I made that example around like cardiovascular disease and people that have title and status that lose their lives, there was literally a day that somebody lost their life on the trading floor. And I watched that. And it really stuck with me, just contemplating this element of kind of a full circle from our conversation of what is the absolute best use of myself in this world? Am I actually living it? Am I actually doing that from behind this desk, from behind this spreadsheet? Is that what I'm on this planet to do? Am I brave enough without the answer to figure out what that could be? Will I be comfortable if I have the gift of living until I'm 80 or 90 to be satisfied with if I didn't figure out what that was? And I'd had conversations with people along the way while I was already trying to figure out like this next best step piece and kind of like doing interviews within a small circle because that was my first job out of school. Like that was all I knew. So talking to people within the bank about like why they did what they did, but it was all within the bank and asking somebody like, you're like 20 years in, like, why do you do this? And they're like, this is all I know.
Yeah.
And I literally couldn't like sit with that. Like it was
That can't.
like my
That doesn't sit well.
spirit was unsettled.
Yeah.
And it's not like actually a fluke when you feel things in your body. Like when we say like, oh, your body's telling you something, like it literally is. Like when you feel a pit in your stomach, that is like actually cortisol. That is our stress hormone telling you like you're feeling some kind of fight or flight. Like my body was literally telling me it was time to move. And I couldn't imagine ignoring that. So I think those moments of like knowing I'm living, but I'm not doing what I'm on this planet to do. And it would be such a darn shame if I went out not giving everything I possibly could to this world because I know this timeline isn't mine in the same way that it wasn't that person's timeline either.
Man, yeah, that's so special, and like I have goosebumps just hearing it because I went through a similar experience too, and I, I'll tell you what I did. I kind of came to that realization as well. So then I started looking for that fulfillment, and I didn't know how to find it. I signed up for like a mentorship program, and I may have shared this story on the podcast before. And I was assigned a mentor who was a high school student in the Bronx, and my job at that point, as I was working in banking, was to kind of help shape them as they're growing. And I really wanted to give back, and I remember inviting him to come join me for a Knicks game. And so he came and he met me at Penn Station. And I'll never forget this. And this was pre-construction. This was over 10 years ago. The kid was marveling because it was the first time he's ever been in Penn Station. He was so happy seeing Penn Station. Like he hadn't even gone into the game yet. And he was so grateful for the opportunity to be inside Penn Station. And I remember like just having this realization, like we don't know what it's like in other people's shoes at times.
Hmm.
And here I am thinking, he's gonna go see the Knicks. The seats are good. Like, I'm gonna make this kid feel good about this experience. But he was just so grateful about being in this rundown train station at the time. And that taught me something about myself too, was that I didn't know that I didn't have the full picture as someone who was seeking that fulfillment. I was really kind of looking out for myself, trying to find this good feeling of like, oh, like I'm successful in my career, but I'm also getting something in return, and that's helping other people out, and I'm going to make this kid's day by bringing him to the next game. But what I didn't realize was that in order to truly be a mentor to someone, you have to fully give yourself in a way where um, your empathy knows no bounds, and you are going beyond just the gesture, and you're meeting them where they are emotionally. Um, and so I bring this up because I kind of we probably lived we probably were living parallel lives
I
during our
know. I feel like
journeys.
we were in a swerve class together at some
Yeah,
point, just
well,
didn't even
yeah, but
realize it.
between the life and finance and swerve and all that, it's so true. And it took me a couple years to finally decode that piece, and that leads me to the question I was going to ask you right after your story was, okay, so you came to this realization, then what did you do?
Yeah. So, to the point of like questions leading me, sometimes not getting answers also helps you understand what to do next. So, here I was asking, like, what is the business of fitness and of wellness? And not getting very many satisfying answers. And in fact, a lot of them were kind of just like still within the bank, where it's like, well, have you thought about consumer banking? And like, that wasn't that wasn't what I was um thinking. Like, no, no,
Oh, wow.
I had not considered
Sounds
that.
about right.
And I will say, there's all those like funny jokes about like Nigerians always being like engineers, lawyers, or like doctors. And I very comfortably failed on those fronts and had no desire to go back to school. But again, when I think about somebody like my mom, who I kind of had this model of like, if you don't know something and there's something you want to do and you want to figure out, then like get yourself what you need to figure out how to be how you want to be. And that was the first time that I was like, okay, I will go to business school. I will go and understand how to create business and figure out how to partner whatever use of self is with like this system. So that way, if I can join it and understand it and be part of something, awesome. If I have to build it, which I didn't, full disclosure, if anybody's thinking like, oh, you have to go to business school with like the full game plan in mind, nah, that's not the way the world.
Yeah,
I don't, am I allowed to say nah on the podcast? Nah,
you can.
it's not the world, right? So I didn't know I didn't go into business school thinking I had to create a business. It was, what are the pathways? And I had this really beautiful journey where no surprises. I definitely kept teaching along the way. Couldn't stop myself. But then also after graduating, kind of getting this full 360 of the fitness space from the top down, whether it was brick and mortar or like content or like really getting to like interface with people in the field. And building Dilagence has been this really beautiful like harmony between the two, where like I deeply know what it's like to be in these fast-paced corporate environments. I know what gets in people's way. It's the time. It's like not understanding what peak performance means and what does it mean to actually kind of like say like I need to be on today and here's how I can use my own body and mind to influence the outcomes that I need to happen. Or it's the organization saying, well, we're providing well-being benefits, but like we're banging our heads against the wall because people don't know that they have free access to counseling, or people don't know that they get $800 in reimbursement. And getting to connect the dots and more or less operationalize well-being as a performance strategy is what I wound up having to do. It was realizing how can I take everything that I'm passionate about, what I know needs to exist, the experiences I myself have had, and bring something to bear that I looked under the hoods. I couldn't figure out a place I was doing it. So it meant that I had to start building it.
Yeah.
And I did. Thus entered Dilagence, which is a play on my name. Like
Yeah.
I always tell people, you don't pass up that domain.
Hmm.
I'm not a marketer, but I know enough to say like, that's pretty good. But the actual word diligence means steady, energetic, and persistent effort, which I do think is everything that you need to be somebody that is like a leader and a professional in the workplace. But when it comes to well-being, it also acknowledges the pursuit. People ask me all the time, like, and to the point of like sharpening our game, they're like, oh, you've got your sleep game right. You've got like your movement game, you're right. You're perfect. I'm like, never ever use that word when it comes to me. It's the constant pursuit. It's constant fine tuning. It's constant practice. And that process is actually the beauty of it, where you're constantly getting better. And it's a really beautiful thing to kind of be this interface that helps people bring those two things together, like harness their power in the workplace and beyond to be able to thrive for as long as they possibly can.
I think I love the explanation of the name, and it's something that like clicks with me 1,000%. Um, a lot of times, the question people pose is, "Are you ever going to be satisfied?" And
Mm.
like for me, my answer has generally been no, but I'm okay with that. Like I've accepted that I won't. I've accepted that's the narrative here, and I'm happy by knowing I'm working on being better today than I was yesterday in whatever it is that I'm doing. And that's where I find that happiness. Um, and so when I was hearing you talk about it, especially, when you hear the word consistency, like people don't realize like how important that word is to anything that you want to do. Anything, literally anything that you want to do in life. I think a lot of people underweigh the importance of that word.
And also believe that consistency means that you can never like come back from a setback. Like setback for a lot of people think of it as like failure, as opposed to consistency means like, let's say you plan to do something 3 times a week and somebody has the mindset of, oh, that means Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and it doesn't happen Tuesday. They think that that's failure. Like that's not failure. You said 3 times a week. Consistency can mean Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It could be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's so many different ways, as long as you're willing to not let like rigidity get in your way and like constantly pursue. And that's literally what like the name is meant to embody, which is like life is long and we intend to keep it as long for each individual as possible, with the tools that enable you to understand how to keep going even when life throws you curveballs.
I love it. What year did Diligence start?
But started building it full time in 2023.
2023. So it's been a
But I
year
had
now?
the domain long name way longer than that. Almost 2 years now.
Okay.
Almost 2 years. So we'll be 2 in 2025, right beginning of
Okay.
next year.
And has it evolved? Well, let me rephrase the question. I think that, as you kind of alluded to earlier, when you think about starting a business, um, you can't really predict the final product. So how many pivots have you had to take?
Well, we actually do have one. It's not necessarily a pivot, but it's actually more of bringing the full vision to fruition. So when I think about why I left Wall Street and I think about the impact that I really want to make, it's with the understanding that we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness being an inalienable right. I think of health as that as well. And what I'm super cognizant of is with the work that we're able to accomplish with companies, that's within these company walls. But how do you make this ability for any human to have the necessary health education and the tools to plug it into their lives accessible? So that's actually always been the North Star. Like even from like when I was on Wall Street to now, it's like, what does that piece look like? So I would say it's probably been more like zigzags, but very squarely now, like the path is how do we go from like helping companies to like scaling this education that makes it so any human, wherever they are, can have accessible information to what they need to do mentally and physically to live life well for as long as possible. So that's where we're going next.
I love that. I love that as being the North Star. So I'm going to dig into it a little bit more. When I think about a lot of the impactful organizations out there, generally speaking, they have values that they hold on to dearly. So I'm going to ask you a little bit around some of the key values behind diligence, and how they drive your decision making.
So key values are certainly people are already living complex lives, so simplicity is key. So making it so easy that people can harness one simple thing and make it super tangible and practical in their lives. So for example, we were talking a lot before around how people have a workout in mind and it has to exist in a certain way for it to count as physical activity. When something super simple, I'll say to somebody, which is like, what floor is your office on? And they'll say it's the 10th floor. I'm like, could you get out of the elevator at the 8th floor and walk up 2 flights? Making it super simple, fit into people's days. And that applies on so many different fronts, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or mindful, which is like, what's the low hanging fruit? Simplicity and accessibility is free. Joy. I think a lot of people think of health as like kind of like eat your vegetables, or think of movement, for example, as something that's supposed to be painful or not enjoyable. Versus like, I love to think about children on a playground. Are you ever going to see them having a terrible time playing tag? No, you see them running around with smiles on their face. And if you think that the smiling part makes it less effective, absolutely not. So it's understanding what brings you joy, because the simpler and happier something is, the easier it's going to be to slot it into people's lives. And most importantly is effective and research based. So what I like to say or compare us to as best as we can, even though this is like not this is not we are not a MacBook, we are not Apple. But if you think about a MacBook, it is a beautiful, really simple interface. But you know that what went into it is a lot of complexity, right? And it's effective. And that's also how we try to operate too, which is like it's evidence-based, research based, but meant to be delivered in a really effective way so it can be operationalized for any human.
That's awesome. Dylan, first of all, I never want to stop talking with you,
Same.
and I realize that I completely ignored the clock, and I am so sorry if you had a meeting or something to get to. So I want to make sure that I
It's
call that
okay. I
out for
dropped them a
listeners out
note.
there. For the listeners out there, I completely went over my time with Dylan. So I do need to wrap this up. But I just want to say thank you. I mean, I think leaving us with your values is such an awesome way to leave off, because it's just foundational for whatever it is that you want to build, to make sure that you lean into those values which drive the decisions that impact not only the day-to-day, but the long-term growth of your vision. And so with that being said, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for joining me. We'll have to bring you on again, but I want to make sure that you know how much I appreciate you today.
I appreciate you too. I could similarly talk to you forever. And I dropped them a note. I was going to be a few minutes late. I'm having way too good of a conversation right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode of the Mile 40 podcast, go ahead, subscribe, leave a review, and share the word. Thank you for being a part of the Mile 40 family. And let's unite in showing the world that comebacks are always greater than setbacks.